Welcome to the currently unnamed podcast, where we're going to talk about various health topics from a bioenergetic or metabolic perspective. I'm Jay Feldman of jayfeldmanwellness.com, and with me is my good friend Mike Fave. Mike is a really knowledgeable guy, and he and I share very similar health perspectives. So we're going to start today by talking through a few different topics. We're going to start just giving a little bit of our backgrounds and our stories, and then we'll talk about the general metabolic or bioenergetic perspective, just kind of see where that leads us, and then we'll also be doing a Q&A for the second half of the episode. And I'd just like to say thank you to everybody who sent in questions. There was a ton of them, and we definitely won't be getting through even a quarter of them today. So if anyone listening would like to send in questions for future episodes, you can send them in to jay@jayfeldmanwellness.com, and that's J-A-Y, all spelled out. All right, Mike, do you want to start just by talking a little bit about your story leading up to when we met?
Just up to when we met?
Yeah, and then I'll tell my story leading up to that point, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Okay. Are we going like all the way back to not being breastfed and all that type of stuff?
No, no, we're not going that far. Go to like when your interest in health started and kind of where that led you.
So I guess I would say I started getting interested in health when I was in middle school. Just for playing sports and going to the gym and starting to lift and all that type of stuff. Prior to that, I was eating, the regular, so starch, a vegetable, and a meat, 3 meals a day type of deal that every American family does for the most part. And then I guess I started moving towards eating more vegetables and raw salads and nuts and protein bars and all that type of stuff. I wasn't really counting calories or anything, just sort of like eating healthy foods per se. And then after that, that was like for bodybuilding, working out, lifting weights. And then when I got into high school, I started to read Dr. Mercola, as I think a lot of people start their health journey with. And then I started moving more towards the nuts and the salads and stuff, away from the protein bars and the protein powders. And I started getting into juicing, and then eventually I tried vegetarianism for 2 weeks, and I felt absolutely terrible. I just couldn't maintain it, so I stopped. And I think people will see that this is a common thread in how I do things. Just I start doing something and I'd have a hard time sticking to it if I feel absolutely terrible. Just the impulse just pulls me away. And so from there, then I moved more into the juicing stuff, and I was still eating meat and whatnot. But then I started getting, I think, sick around end of sophomore year of high school to junior year of high school, having some pretty significant digestive problems, just bloating after I ate. I was eating a lot of nuts, drinking a lot of raw green juice with carrots and beets and apples and things like that. And I was just I just remember being super bloated, and just very uncomfortable. And then I started, and I was doing a lot of nuts too. So a lot of peanut butter, a lot of cashews, things like that. And then I wound up having my gallbladder removed when I was in my junior year, when I was 18. Because after I would eat, I would get the extreme pain for between 4 and 9 hours, and just be laying down and couldn't do anything. And I was losing weight really fast. So it was actually around 6'1", 6'2", and about 155 pounds.
Okay. Well, I was about that too. So we were both pretty skinny in high school, but all right, go ahead.
Yeah. So then I had my gallbladder out, and I stopped juicing. I quit juicing. That was the end. After they took it out, I was I'm not juicing ever again. Just because I thought that was what led to it. So then I went more towards a paleo approach. That was sort of I guess the answer at that time. It was it's grains and this. So I also moved away from the nuts because I thought that those were causing some of the issue as well. So my paleo approach was basically greens, white rice, and vegetables. And I just,
and meat.
yeah, and meat, like fish, white fish, cod, sole, beef. And then I would use butter. I was cool with butter. So I went with that for a while, but I was still, after I would eat the rice, I would get very tired. Or like if I'd have the rice with meals, I'd get tired. So obviously then I moved into like a high fat, low carb approach. And that went into the freshman year of college. And I was eating ridiculous amounts of fat and meat every day and greens. So it was basically like a pound of meat, 6 to 12 eggs, and like, I guess 4 to 8 ounces of butter.
Yeah.
And then I eventually found lean gains online. So I went into intermittent fasting. So I was doing a 16-8. So I would still eat that general template, but within the 16 and 8. And while doing these approaches,
for people that don't know, that means you don't eat for 16 hours and you do eat for an 8-hour window.
Yeah. So I wouldn't start eating until 12 p.m. and then I would eat till 8.
Mm-hmm.
And I would do like a fasted workout, and then I would have my meal right after. And I actually got very lean. Both of us actually went together and got tested. And I think, what was it, like 8% body fat, 6% body fat, something crazy like that. I was still eating like 3,500 calories a day, but it was just 0 carbs. It was just all fat. And actually at this point,
and a ton of protein too.
And a ton of protein. My gut function was actually okay here. But I was cold a lot. My workouts were suffering. My sleep was pretty terrible. And I was a freshman in college, obviously. And I was just overall, like, I would get sick. I would get sick every like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that, like once a month. Then eventually we met and became roommates, and we were doing the intermittent fasting and the restricting carbs except for on workout days and whatnot. And yeah, so I guess that's up to the point that we met. So within that time, I guess I starved myself, tried vegetarian diet, intermittent fasting, like a Mercola based diet, low carb diet. And at one point I was doing like a high fruit and plant based diet of like a lot of juices and nuts. So I did quite a few iterations there.
Yeah.
And all while constantly working out, and being in like pretty decent shape. Never heavy, never really got fat or gained a lot of weight. Always.
Right. I mean, outwardly, most people would have said you looked healthy for sure.
Oh yeah. I actually looked great throughout all of the period of time doing this. I looked great. The one thing that I really didn't do was, when I started getting healthy, I stopped eating a lot of bread and wheat and pasta and things like that, and oats. But that was because I noticed that when I eat, I get very bloated. So I was like trying to figure out how to eat and not be bloated. That was like the biggest issue that I had when I first started everything. It was like, how do I get abs and how do I not be bloated?
Sure. So. Yeah, definitely. So, and so I had a pretty similar story, just trying all those different diets, which is so funny how that happens. I mean, I know so many people who are in a similar place to us now where, kind of went along a similar journey. So for me, when I was like 12, 13, started working out and was playing sports. And so it's the same kind of thing where you start to get interested in nutrition and you want to look good and have the 6-pack and everything. And so to get the abs, which I didn't, I mean, I was skinny, but I just didn't have the abs. So, I just started eating less. Cause
starve yourself.
What's that?
Obviously you have to starve yourself.
Right. Of course. Like it was just, that was like whatever, it was just known that you just eat less to get leaner. And that was what I learned in health class. That was what I learned everywhere. And there was no reason to question it. I was just, it was just like a very clear, that's just what you knew. So I started doing that. And, when I wouldn't get abs, I kept eating less and less. And so it got to a point where I was eating very little. I probably could have been diagnosed as anorexic. But
this is in high school, right?
This was like the very start of high school. Well, no, not even. This was like 8th grade. A perfect time to not be eating.
Yeah, right.
And so, I would be going to football practice and I would eat nothing. I would wake up late, so I didn't eat in the morning, and I would eat a protein bar before football practice, go to practice, come back and eat dinner, and then not eat at night. And, kind of using all these different things. And I was hungry constantly, and I knew it, but it was, it was like fighting that with willpower, in order to get the abs.
Willpower for the win.
Right. And yeah, so I was really not eating. And around that time too, I started having a lot of other issues, like mental health issues. I was really depressed for a period of time. And took me many, many years before I connected those dots, because the depression seemed to go away once I started eating more, even though I was still pretty severely under eating.
I actually had the depression too when I was doing that as well. When I was like under eating the juices and stuff, I actually went to go see a psychologist as well for a period of time.
Huh. Yeah. Same here. Although I wasn't juicing, but and so then moving through high school, I found Charles Poliquin's work, and so kind of got started on the low carb and meat and nut breakfast, which was terrible. But yeah, I continued lifting and continued working out and not eating enough. I remember looking at bodybuilders who, when I was trying to design my diet, who were eating or who were about the same weight as me, and they'd be eating like 3,500 calories, and they were, lean and ripped. And I couldn't understand how they were so muscular and lean while eating so much, because I was eating less than half that. So to test it out, I remember once I tried to design a diet that was based on theirs, but like in the portions that would be like a lot for me. And it was like 2,000 calories. And I remember eating that meal plan, and I was so full all the time because my body was so adjusted to barely eating. And that was
also eat all the oatmeal and bread and everything too. I don't know how people do that. That's super filling. Yeah,
the oatmeal would bloat me, but even like eating the meat and nut breakfast or just eggs in the morning, like starting the day with 2 eggs, I was like my digestion was very slow. It wasn't good at all.
Yeah.
And I definitely always had bloating and things too. And so that was like probably like freshman or sophomore year in high school, and then I did, after a few weeks, I remember adjusting to that, and I started eating a little bit more, but it was still way less than I should have been eating as I was growing and working out so much. And then throughout the rest of high school, I got more and more into the low carb, and I was eating, it started out with eating like the complex carbs like quinoa and oatmeal and everything.
It's an ancient grass.
Ancient grain. Yeah. And then finishing high school and going into college, I found like Dave Asprey and Mark Sisson and, the paleo crowd and low carb crowd. So I started doing the low carb, but I was still kind of doing a bodybuilding thing where I would be eating like 6 meals a day. Mm-hmm. But I just had this idea that carbs were bad and caused all the problems. I was on the meal plan freshman year, and that was when we met. And then we kind of started collaborating, and you were doing your super low carb, like actually low carb, which I wasn't doing. So, and I started with that as I learned more, and we got more into the paleo and low carb and intermittent fasting and ketosis.
Well, I never did ketosis. I guess that's fair to say. I didn't actually do it because you can't do it eating 300 grams of protein a day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You were eating a ton of protein.
You did it. You actually did it right. I wasn't able to do it.
Yeah. Which I don't know which is better, but yeah, I was actually in ketosis, and all along this time we were going to the gym all the time and trying to lift heavy and not feeling good. I mean, we would force ourselves to work out. What's that?
We looked great. Like, super good.
Yeah. Yeah. We were really lean, really muscular. And it's funny because you were always, what do they call it? The canary in the coal mine. Like you always knew when to stop doing something. So we would be going to the gym, and I would just will myself to go and continue to work out, or will myself to not eat the protein or carbs. But you would just be like, no, like I'm not working out today. I'm too tired. Like I don't have the energy to do this. And since you were doing it, was like, oh, like if that's okay, like I'll stop too. Yeah.
And then we would eat a bunch of carbs. I would start eating carbs on days that we weren't working out and stuff. And you're just like, no, I'm going to save for after I work out. But as soon as I opened like the bag of frozen fruit, you already knew that both of us were going to do it. And then if you did, it was worse for me, because then it's like, well, if Jay's doing it, then I can do it even more.
Yeah, so we would buy like a 5-pound bag of frozen berries, because berries were the lowest in fructose and sugar as far as fruit goes. And the plan was it would last us weeks. And we would break it out, and we would each like have a handful, and it was like, okay, that's it, because it was a no workout day. And then you would just keep going for more, and before we knew it, the bag was gone
in like a night.
Yeah.
A night or 2 nights.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it was our bodies telling us like, look, what you're doing is not working.
Yeah.
Despite the amount of fat we were eating and everything. And I still probably wasn't eating enough, which didn't really eat enough until we found the kind of newer Ray Peat perspective, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, and so then around that time, I found Danny Roddy, his Hair Like a Fox book. And, that was kind of just the push that we needed to say, we just needed something to say that carbs were beneficial. And it was this completely new, it went so far beyond that. It was this completely new perspective where.
But it was scientifically valid to some extent. It wasn't like people just saying, oh, it was like there was studies and things referenced to it that, because I know that was a selling point for me, because you hear people say, oh, I eat all this carbs, but like you're seeing all this stuff on insulin and cancer and all that stuff from the keto crowd, and then like the NADPH ratios and all that, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe there's something here. And especially because the bloating went away on high fat diets, like the digestion was like there was definitely benefits to switching over from like the traditional grain based diets to mostly meat, fat, and greens, which is what we were doing with some like rice sometimes and fruit. Right. Sparingly. So we definitely got benefits, but after a while, I think we both sort of like cracked, especially under the amount of, like, we were doing crazy workouts. We were lifting super heavy, and they're like 2-hour long workouts, like 4 days a week, just like trashing ourselves and like struggling to get through them.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're kind of going to dive into why this was so detrimental for us, but And while we were following these paleo diets and whatever else it was, we definitely didn't really understand the physiology. We understood the claims that insulin was bad and carbs spike insulin, and that leads to diabetes. Like we could follow that progression, and we would listen to Dave Asprey talking about mitochondria and how fat are ideal for mitochondrial fuel, and that was enough for us. We didn't know any alternative, and we didn't really have the tools to dig into it more. And so when we came across Danny Roddy, who was arguing against those things, it was like, oh, well, I don't even know. Like we didn't have any, like, a deep enough knowledge previously where we could weigh anything against it, where we could argue against it.
That was a really rough period, I remember, for me, because there was something that actually had like points of like valid perspective that completely countered. Because, people who go against paleo, like the claims that they go against it aren't like, oh, meat causes heart disease and this and that causes heart disease. And we had already
saturated fat.
Yeah, we had already seen that hypothesis not really play out well, and see the studies not really supporting it. Mm-hmm. And then, so when you see Danny, like, you see like a paradigm shift, but for completely different reasons. And you see that he also came from the paleo sphere with like the issues like we had. And so then it's just like, you can either ignore it and just like completely drop it, but like we couldn't do it just because it made sense. Like there was like, and that was really difficult, because you're like, you have this paradigm that you believe, and then you find something else that completely questions the belief. So now it's just like, well, that was like when we both were here. Well, I guess this is just a belief. I guess we just have to try this out. We have to change our thought. Like we need to like check the facts at this point, because maybe we're wrong.
Yeah. And like you said, it wasn't completely going against everything. I mean, it wasn't saying saturated fat is bad and salt is bad. It was just, there was the carbohydrates was a big difference. But so yeah, it was exactly what you're saying, where it was someone who was coming from a perspective we already had and essentially evolving past it. And so that was really intriguing to us. And it
actually fit in well after paleo too. Mm-hmm. Because they weren't saying to eat starch again, and both of us were having issues with starch. He was saying, well, maybe sugar's good. So the biggest hurdle was overcoming this idea that fructose is a metabolic toxin that goes to the liver like alcohol and and whatever else. That was like, and especially because I remember after we ate the 5-pound bag of blueberries, or like we would like make coconut flour or whatever fiber cookies and stuff like that had a little bit of sugar. We'd wake up the next day and we'd be like even leaner than we were. Yeah. And we would be like, and like we would feel good. So it'd be like, well, sugar is a toxin. Like the first thought process was, wow, like since we avoid sugar so much, our bodies just must be like so good at like handling it. And then eventually it was just like, no, like we actually feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. It was always surprising, because when we would binge on the coconut flour cookies or the berries. And, Yeah, we did. We didn't feel terrible after. I mean, it never felt great because there's so much like in your gut, but we just like ate so much. But yeah, and so when after finding Danny's work, it wasn't like we jumped right in. We took a good year,
change.
Yeah, of just making small changes and testing it out. And it started out, we would eat plantains. That was our big thing. And so we started with just one on our workout days, and then we would have one on our non-workout days, and add two. We'd have two on our workout days,
or up to 6. Some
well, you would have up to like 8 to 10 sometimes, which was crazy.
Well, they talk about the like refeeding period.
Yeah.
After you don't have carbs. And I think that because I was more impulsive to some extent about things, that I just like, because the sweet plantains, like we were calling them maduros, but the sweet plantains it's like we finally have sugar, like after all this time, and you just want it. That and like and then we cooked them in butter and salt. So it was just like the ultimate combination of like fried sweet plantain and butter with like the sea salt and everything. So and
the cinnamon sugar rice too.
Yeah. So
and so we started experimenting with all, like, it was just kind of, we were adding in carbs to our original paleo or keto diet. Like, it wasn't like we completely shifted. We weren't doing orange juice. We weren't doing we were still sticking with, for whatever reason, the rice and plantains for the most part.
Well, and the frozen fruit smoothies. I remember I was doing those a lot.
You were. I don't think I did as much.
No.
But I do remember you doing that. You would just mix them with water.
Yeah.
And we weren't doing milk either.
Juice is bad.
Right.
Juice has fructose.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that fructose.
We don't want too much fructose. Like, we want mostly glucose. We have to eat starch.
Even though we were adding honey and we were eating the sweet plantain. So I don't really know what the thought process was there as to why we weren't doing the juice, and we weren't doing white sugar. We weren't doing.
Well, my thought process at that time was, number one, I was using Chronometer, which I guess at some point we'll talk about. But I was using Chronometer. I was trying to hit all of my nutrients, and like using fruit was much more ideal to hit the nutrients than grains or anything like that. And
yeah, but we were still like, we weren't doing juice or milk.
No, I know, but like it was because I was still coming from the paleo template. So in my mind, it was like, like all these studies show the benefits of fruits and vegetables. So like if I at least get my carbs from like fruits and vegetables, then would assume that I'm not really going to have an issue, because like it's for the paleo framework, it's like, what would the caveman, we were in Miami. So if you're in South Florida and you're walking around a couple thousand years ago, the only thing to eat was plantains and papayas and alligators and lizards and whatever else. So like, I was thinking, well, if people were living here back in the day, like they were probably eating this stuff too. So I guess it should be okay. And so that's how I justified it to myself. But we were still very much paleo. We were still under the idea that we should limit the amount of white rice, or limit the amount of like the smoothies and honey and stuff. Like, I remember we were like, the plantains are okay because there's like mostly more starch than sugar. And
I remember we were looking at that. We were trying to get more starch still.
Yeah.
And we didn't, like, after a little while, we realized we weren't doing as well with that either. And we really kind of experimented more and doing more sugar and less starch. What's that?
With the plantains, I remember we were both up at 220 pounds. And when we were doing the
we were powerlifting too. I mean, we were muscular. Go ahead.
But we went from 170 or so when we were doing low carb, like super low.
A little more than that. We were we were like 185, or at least I was.
No, when I was down at that. Remember when I came back from Christmas break, and you were just like, wow, you're super lean right now.
Yeah.
I was down around like the 6%. Like I was at 170, 175. And then when we started adding back in carbs, that's when we just like, it was like within like 3 months or 4 months, we were up to 220. Just like a 50-pound gain. And a lot of it was muscle because we were lifting a lot. But
well, right. I mean, I probably gained like, 30 pounds, and you probably gained like 50.
Well, I had a lot more to go.
Well, yeah, and you just do everything to an extreme. You would have 8 plantains, and I would have 4.
But my body fat percentage definitely went up a lot too.
Yeah, and mine did too. And we kind of realized that we realized that it wasn't even necessarily a body fat thing. We just started not feeling as great. And so then
it was insane.
Yeah, we were definitely getting bloated with all the plantains.
Plantain.
So then we moved away from the starch a little more, did more sugar, and a lot of the weight came right off. And that kind of led into the modern era of Ray Peat inspired diet. So go ahead.
We didn't start with milk right away. We went mostly to the orange juice.
Yeah, the juices and fruit. We did dried fruit too.
Yeah. So we kept to we just got rid of we basically kept the greens and the meat and the butter and we stopped doing olive oil too, because the whole PUFA perspective. But it was mostly butter, coconut oil, meat, greens. And then we replaced plantains and white rice with orange juice and granulated sugar and dried fruits and fruit smoothies and stuff like that. Yeah. And there's definitely a positive change there for sure.
Huge positive change.
I felt great for a while when I first did that.
Yeah. And then we've made more since then. I mean, I think that's still been the template. And then there's just been more minor adjustments since then.
Well, no, because I think the major adjustments were trying out dairy for me.
Yeah.
And so trying out the different types.
I forgot about dairy. Yeah.
And then I remember at one point, one of the worst points that I had was when I was reading about depleting PUFA, and I did a 0 fat diet. So I was literally just eating shrimp and orange juice and granulated sugar and greens and fruit, and that was it. And I just remember it strongly because it my mind state was terrible. I was just and my libido was horrible.
Yeah, and that was something that I struggled with too.
Yeah, both of us. When we were doing super low fat,
I never did the low fat. I'm talking more in the low carb days. In the low carb days, I struggled.
Well, when we switched over to Peat for a while, I remember having issues, and because I didn't have libido issues when I was on high fat, and then I had terrible libido problems when I went low fat. My mind state was terrible. My emotions were all over the place, and I wasn't really stable. I was having adrenaline rushes 50 times a day.
Oh, I remember. Yeah, no, I wasn't. I don't think I was doing as much low fat in it. But okay, anyway, so I didn't want to spend too much time talking about all of our different diet variations, because the really biggest change was when we moved from the low carb, keto, paleo to the kind of Ray Peat perspective via Danny Roddy. And so I do want to talk a little bit about the details of that perspective and how it's different, and especially for the people listening who aren't super familiar with it.
No, I just bring those up because my current template isn't. I don't think either. Well, yours is more so than mine, but my current template is not as within the general Peat template that people think of. I follow Peat's principles, but the recommendations that he makes offhand, sometimes I don't really follow those just because I tried them out and they didn't. So the low fat stuff didn't work for me really. And I'm not doing any dairy and I don't do any orange juice. And most people they think Ray Peat, and it's just 2 quarts of milk and a quart of orange juice. And that is how you lose weight if you want to go low fat. And not those things, it wasn't necessarily how it worked for me. So that's just why I draw the different iterations of Peat that we did. Because it's not that I didn't try those things. We both tried those iterations and sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. I mean, I agree with definitely some disagreements on that kind of blanket recommendation of drinking a ton of milk and orange juice just to start. And also the low fat. Neither of those played out well for me, although I do know other people where those things do work well.
I think it's more about the principles with Peat, and that's the important part.
Right. Well, and one of the biggest principles is experimentation. So he kind of laid out all these ideas or perspectives, and then it's kind of experimenting with them. Because there's a lot. I mean, we can talk through some of the mistakes that people make when finding his work. Talk about the excess supplements, the excess focus on hormones. Let's hold off a little bit on that and first just talk about really what the perspective is.
Okay.
And how it differs from a lot of the other views. So I guess I would just say that when it really comes down to a very complete universal picture of health that starts at the cellular level, and it's really dependent on energy.
Yeah.
And so the idea is basically that if the cell has enough energy, it's able to function, and that moves up from there, and then the organs are able to function properly in other tissues, and the organism functions properly. And basically that the organism's function is dependent on energy. And then using
the cohesiveness as well of the organism as a whole is
sure, which I mean isn't entirely different from some of the alternative views where, I mean, they consider it to be holistic. It's oftentimes not in practice.
Yeah.
But they at least recognize that, you know, liver function is not independent from heart function or brain function. You know, that's definitely important. Because it's all directly intertwined. But so this idea of really coming down to energy and metabolism, which is essentially the process that our bodies produce energy from in in the mitochondria of the cells. And so then kind of applying this to all facets of existence and our environment. So applying it to nutrition and how how the different foods we eat affect our ability to produce energy and use energy, how exercise affects it, how red light affects it, how sunlight affects it.
How the environment at large.
Yeah,
everything, every interaction, everything that the organism is in and exposed to, everything altogether, light, temp, whatever it is.
Psychological stress and emotional stress and everything. Yeah. So that's kind of the more general perspective. And then we can break it down a little further from there, where some of the important tenets as far as like nutrition goes is that the polyunsaturated fats are a big issue because they essentially impede our ability to produce energy and cause several other issues, which I don't want to dig into too much. And the idea that carbohydrates are really an ideal fuel source from the perspective of producing energy for our brain and otherwise, in that they're more efficient and produce energy essentially better than
which also doesn't mean that fats are negative.
No, it doesn't.
I think that a lot of people see, carbs are the ideal fuel source, and then they think, and then Pete talks about, the Randall effect, which we can get into another time, but then it's like, well, fats aren't good.
Right.
And I think that people get into that. And I mean, I've had a few correspondences with Pete actually asking him about that, and he didn't really he didn't say things negatively about fats. He just sort of frames carbs as very vital and necessary.
Yeah. And fats are used they're important for digestive function.
And other things besides purely energy, which I think people often completely forget.
It goes beyond being a fuel. It's used for, it has immune functions, digestive functions, all sorts of stuff. It's also used as a structural component in the cells.
Yeah.
Which is part of why the saturated fats are much better than polyunsaturated fats. Has to do with their usage as a structure in the cell.
Yeah. I think that important to bring up is on Pete's central hypothesis behind all of his work is that energy and structure are dependent at every level. They're completely dependent upon each other. They're not separate. So you need to have structure to stream energy, and when you stream energy, you're able to create more structure. And so it's almost like a feed forward reaction that's it's exponential upon itself. And so you have the cells basically utilizing energy, and the more energy they utilize, the more structure you can hold within the organism. And then the more structure, the more energy you can use, and it sort of moves along that pathway. So streaming energy is the most important part and basis of the hypothesis. And then the other thing that I think it's really important to talk about with Pete is that he takes this perspective of energy and structure, and then he looks at all the hormones through that lens to understand how the body works. So you have this beautifully laid out system or summary of the organism and what the different hormones are sort of conveying, because they're basically chemical messengers. So they're indicative of the energetic states of different parts of the body. And he breaks it down into sort of, I think it's important. Do you want me to get into just the basic between serotonin and thyroid and stuff like that, or?
Not really. I really think that's somewhat secondary. I mean, so the reason why I say that is I think that sometimes there can be a misplaced focus on the hormones. But as you said, the hormones they're messengers, and they're representative of the underlying energetic state. And so, we can get to that in a second. But one thing I want to talk about is how how this differs from a lot of the other perspectives. So if we were to compare it to paleo or ketogenic, where the idea is that carbohydrates stimulate insulin and insulin causes all these issues.
Yeah. They also have things in common that I think are important too.
Absolutely.
Between the perspectives, you know, like,
but for different reasons. So, and I think that's the biggest difference. So you take this perspective where it's actually like an understanding of what's going on the deeper physiological level, as opposed to, which, I mean, it's not quite that clear cut, because obviously there's physiological pathways that people cite for why insulin causes diabetes and insulin resistance.
Well, this is a more general physiologic pathway that is applicable across multiple levels. It's not just like learning about mTOR or something like that, which is very, very specific to, like, it covers multiple systems, but it's one specific pathway. It's like trying to see the desert through a grain of sand. Like, instead of trying to just look at the desert first, and then you can understand the grain of sands within the context of the desert. You know, it's that, yeah. I think that's why Peat's hypothesis and his work is so valuable. Even though, like, his recommendations may not work for everybody, it's besides the point. It's the conceptual basis that really is what I think is the most central thing to look at in his work. It's, you know, he recommends whatever he recommends, but it's really the principles behind it that I think you and I think are the most valuable.
Yeah, definitely. It's seeing the forest through the trees, you know, that whole comparison. And I do want to say, I mean, Ray, he's not very concrete with his recommendations. So I don't want to put words in his mouth, and that he recommends that you should be eating this thing, and that if you don't eat that thing, that then you're, you know, or if you do eat it and you have a bad response, then that's your fault. Like, that's not how he goes about it. So
no, the recommendations that people assume most times with Pete, like the things that people associate with him, not necessarily things that he directly recommends for people to do, because he never recommends anybody to do anything. Right. It's more just like, well, I did this one time. And so things like that are, I think it's helpful to say that, because I think a lot of people come to it and they have a Pete diet, and it's not, he doesn't like tell you to have a diet. He just gives you principles to underlie the diet. And then those were his like implementations of those principles. Doesn't mean that you implement them the same way. I think a lot of people get lost in that, because then they like try the Ray Peat diet and they're like, oh, it didn't work for me. Like, it just doesn't work. And it's like, well, you sort of missed the point a little bit. And I see that a lot on the forum. People coming and just trying it and like, wow, I like feel terrible. And it's like, well, you don't have to drink a gallon of milk and a gallon of orange juice.
Right. Yeah. Well, and then they blame it on, they say that then the whole paradigm is wrong, and then sugar caused all these issues just because you had these issues when you tried to, you know, apply whatever.
There definitely are nuances to different people's contexts that are very important for why certain things won't work for some people and other things will work for other people. So, I mean, yeah, it's again, if you want to distill the important things to look at from Pete, it is the principles, not the direct recommendations or associations that people hold with the man himself. More, what are the principles he's laying out? And I think the main ones are, you know, PUFA, iron, enough carbohydrates, gut health, things like that. I think those are paramount.
Yeah, and with his and I think that's an important perspective that he has elucidated as well, with his emphasis on experimentation and on these principles. He's, you know, there's a lot of people who come into various diets and their idea is, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And his perspective is so drastically different from that it really,
it's literally 180 degrees. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
It is the opposite of that.
Absolutely. Right. And it's so powerful, because you know, his whole anti-authoritarianism, I think, is huge. And just to kind of explain that a bit, the idea is that when we subscribe to an authority by blindly believing someone because of the authority they have, whether it's they're a doctor or they're on a TV show or whatever it is, there's basically like, there's a lot of issues with that.
We invalidate ourselves and our experiences. Exactly. And like when you look at Pete and you're talking about everything in the environment altogether, whether it's light interactions and everything affects you, one of the most significant things is to take responsibility for yourself. Like, that is one of the most metabolically activating things that you can do is to literally take responsibility for yourself and experiment and figure things out and be present and aware in your life. I think that is like just the perspective. Even if you continue to eat PUFA, if you adopt that perspective, I think there's some merit.
Huge. And I mean, there's a lot of evidence for kind of the learned helplessness being really damaging, which again, the idea is that a lot of aspects of our society currently put people in a state of learned helplessness where whether it's due to the way that they have to work in order to live or the fact that they feel like they have no power kind of or influence on what's going on around them. But then especially as far as the authoritarianism goes, where people feel powerless and helpless, especially when it comes to something like their health. You know, it's entirely trusting a doctor or someone who gives you a meal plan or whatever it is.
It's all outsourced.
Yeah, exactly. And not taking, and it requires taking responsibility for your own health, which is a big step. But once you do that, it makes the biggest difference. That's what makes the difference between people who really get results and people who don't, for the most part. Some people get lucky, but outside of that, like if you want to be successful as far as your health goes, I think that you have to try to learn for yourself and really educate yourself.
Well, you can't really find out something that works for you doesn't without experiencing yourself. You can't. I mean, this is where the William Blake quote comes in that everybody likes to throw around, but like the true method of knowledge is experimentation and something along those lines. And it's like, you really can't know something unless you experience it. You know, you can read about something, but it's somebody else's observation, somebody else's experience. And, you know, it's sort of secondhand information. You got to really experience it yourself. So, and like to directly know it, to truly directly knowing something, like, and this is a very like literal statement. There's no symbolism, flowery, whatever. Like this statement is very literal. To really know anything, you have to experience it yourself. You have to experiment with it yourself. That's what the experimentation is to go and experience it.
Yeah. And again, there's nuance with that, where just because you try something and you have a certain result doesn't mean that whatever you tried was entirely responsible for it. You have to you have to consider all the factors, all the variables.
Well, the context is important, which is something they also talk about. So it's like, that's why I think it's hard to get Peat, because you have all these different principles that we're trying to, I guess, distill right now that we learned along the way. And when you first read him and because the thing is, coming from the original context that we come from, specifically in like Western civilization, like just the way we're raised, like we're put in school for all these years and like we're taught obedience. We're taught, we're indoctrinated into authoritarianism. Like it is evident in the teacher-student atmosphere, in all the dynamics that we have with like coaches and things like that. There's like sort of a lack of people relying on themselves. Like when you go to the sick, when you get sick, you go to the doctor. When you have a car accident or something, you go to the mechanic. Like everything is sort of outsourced and compartmentalized. Even the different fields are outsourced and compartmentalized, and it sort of removes us from, well, maybe I got sick because I ate this, or maybe like, maybe I can go to the auto parts store and fix the car with whatever, you know?
Right. And there's some things where, like with a car, it's much less important, you know, but when it comes to something like your health,
or your information, your knowledge, because like even in our current, like with everyone talking about fake news and everything, like it's really like even our information has been outsourced to the point that like now people are starting to recognize maybe the channels that we're getting our information aren't such ideal places to go. So
yeah, well, and so that's kind of the bigger issue with what you're talking about with the way our education system is built, and really a lot of our Western society, is that it prevents us from questioning things. You know, it's kind of blindly listening to authority, which is authoritarianism, and the problems with that like seep into every aspect of our life. Health is just one of them. But and so we can, if we were to look back at just your and my health experiences, you know, we can see that very clearly, where it started out with, I mean, the entire time it was just blindly following whatever was next.
Well, not necessarily, because I feel like we experimented with things along the way. It just, we also like there was dogma involved for sure, and that's where the idea of willpower comes in. But you like, you just got to will yourself and it'll eventually work. Like, I think that is somewhat dogmatic. And like, I think that's where the authoritarian aspect comes in. But like, Justin, the other thing to think about is like, we were pretty young and we were like trying all these different diets and like doing all this other stuff. And then like, I know like we switched when we were both talking, like we switched like 5-10 diets.
Yeah. But the way that we were choosing the diets it was still in an authoritarian way. It was like whatever teacher we had at the time, whatever they told us, we followed it. And like, if we had a previous experience that completely conflicted, then maybe we wouldn't go with it. Like once we did vegetarian or once we did,
everyone's going to go to vegan.
Right. Yeah. But it wasn't like, it's very different from experimenting based on like that comes out of questioning and education.
There is a paradigm shift now for sure. There's a paradigm shift now.
Like if I think about when I was following paleo, someone were to ask me why carbs are bad, I could rattle off all the reasons, or when I was doing keto or whatever, I could rattle off all the reasons why carbs cause insulin resistance and ketones and fat are better for mitochondrial function. And, we could talk about all sorts of the issues that come out when
and ages and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we had reasons but it still was.
Well, we didn't really read into the research ourselves. We just
didn't understand it.
The figures.
Yeah. Well, we listened. Yeah. We followed the headlines. We parroted what we were told, but we didn't really understand it. We were never really educating ourselves. At least, I mean, like there's levels, there's thresholds, of course.
Yeah.
But we weren't really questioning it. It was just kind of the next thing. And
well, that's basically that's what we were taught to do in school anyway, was to just absorb information and spit it back out. Like we weren't actually like taking any sort of look at what the information was actually saying and trying to understand the perspective and this and that. That came, I think when we had enough carbs, we were able to do that.
Yeah. It's definitely a two-way street there, where improving your metabolic health and having the energy to actually think clearly allows you to think clearly. It made a huge difference. I mean, when we consider how much we were under eating and the lack of carbs that we had, I mean, it's no wonder that we were dealing with the issues we were dealing with. And definitely the perspective and ability to think changed drastically.
Well, I think for me, the main point that I can think of that comes to mind is just rigidity. We were very rigid, very like things were rigid, like just the way we saw things was rigid. And I think that was definitely a function of like the metabolic state. It was almost like you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Like we were just in the old dog metabolism. And it really felt that way. I remember it just like stuck to your beliefs and you weren't. And now, I mean, they're not as much beliefs as much as they are sort of ever changing understandings, where, if you find new evidence that sort of contradicts something, you're going to go look into it. It's like, it's an activation. It's like exciting. It's like something new.
Yeah. It's much more open-minded, and you hold your beliefs much less tightly.
Yeah.
Which changed for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry,
well, especially after you go through all the iterations of diet that you basically can, like trying every random food.
Yeah.
So there's also that.
Yeah, it's true. All right. So we're going to dig into the Q&A now. Again, there was a ton of questions. So thank you very much for everyone who sent them in. There's no way we're going to get through very many of them today, especially because they were good questions. So let's start with Natalie. Natalie said, doctors have told me to stop eating sugar because they say studies show it causes inflammation. Since inflammation is what seems to cause my pain, it also seems to make sense to stop eating sugar. If you say to eat sugar, won't eating it cause me more pain due to inflammation? So the central question here is, does eating sugar cause me inflammation or cause inflammation? That's essentially what it is. Do you want to start? Or do you want me to start?
You could start.
Sure. All right. So the idea that sugar causes inflammation really is not so. Okay. So we have to start with what sugar is. Sugar is a combination of fructose and glucose. And so you have white table sugar, which is just sucrose, which is just a combination of those two. And then you also have sugar. Well, I guess, okay. I guess I should back up. So sugars are glucose, fructose, and galactose are kind of the simplest sugars.
Monosaccharides.
Right. Say it again.
Monosaccharides.
Thanks.
How do you pronounce it, Jay? Please let everyone know.
They're correctly pronounced monosaccharides. Okay, so I guess we really need to differentiate between sugars and starches. Starches are essentially a long chain of just glucose, and sugars, on the other hand, so starches are found in like foods like potatoes and root vegetables, grains, beans, legumes,
pasta, bread, all that stuff.
Yeah. And then sugars, which are found in fruits, honey, white table sugar, milk. So those are, rather than being a really long chain of glucose, it's typically either individual. What's that?
Yeah, go for it.
It's typically either what are called monosaccharides, which are basically single molecules, which you have glucose, fructose, and galactose, or combinations of those. So you have lactose and milk, which is a combination of galactose and glucose. You have sucrose, which is white table sugar, and that's a combination of glucose and fructose. Those are kind of the main ones. There's a bunch of other combinations too. So in something like fruit, you have about a third of sucrose, which is half glucose, half fructose. And then you have a third of just glucose and a third of just fructose.
In free form.
Right, in free form. So you have, altogether, you have about 50-50 glucose and fructose. So to talk about sugar overall, typically when people talk negatively about sugar, it's in regard to the fructose portion, because glucose is also present in starches. So it's assumed that since starches are good, then the glucose can't be the issue. So what we really have to talk about is fructose. What's that?
Starches are good.
Right. Yeah. In parentheses. Not that they're inherently bad, but
we'll get to it.
That's just like the mainstream view, is that complex carbohydrates are good, and those are starch containing. So fructose, the reason why it's said that fructose is bad is that they say that fructose is, when it's absorbed in the digestive tract, it's then picked up by the liver. And then the idea, well, basically in the liver, it can be converted to glycogen. It can be used to produce energy, or it can be converted to fat.
And it's mostly converted to glycogen or for energy, like very small amounts for fat that is negligible. Right,
which is kind of the whole point. So what the people against fructose will point to is they'll say that a lot of the fructose gets converted to fat. And when that happens, it activates various inflammatory pathways and also causes fatty liver disease, essentially, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And a lot of that sentiment is based on some very faulty research. So it's said that conversion of fructose to fat is what goes along with the inflammation. So that's what they say is really what's causing the inflammation, is that whole scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And so the research supporting this, first off, a lot of it is on rats. And rat livers function very differently from us in that they don't really handle sugar very well. Or fructose, I should say. So rats are many, many times more likely to convert fructose to fat in this inflammatory pathway than we are, to the point where there's been many research studies saying that rats, anything to do with rat livers, really shouldn't even be used to compare to humans. Like, it's a very poor model for humans. Yet most of the research on fructose is based on rat studies.
Yeah.
And then there's also a couple of studies, or at least one in particular, where they've showed that the polyunsaturated fats play a big role in this inflammation. So when fructose is given to rats in the presence of polyunsaturated fats, or just kind of in a regular rat, it causes this inflammation and non-alcoholic fatty liver. Whereas when it's given to rats that are given a compound that blocks certain polyunsaturated fat metabolites, then the fatty liver doesn't develop, and the inflammation doesn't occur, and the insulin resistance doesn't occur, or doesn't develop. So
I think it's also important to point out, before you keep going, just for context, in order to induce NASH, or non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or fatty liver, you basically have to give high amounts of fat with high amounts of sugar. It's not purely high amounts of sugar usually. Usually they do both.
In rats too.
In the rats, yeah, because they give in a lot of the studies that I've seen. I mean, they could do them without it, but from what I understand, you need to do both, and that's why the polyunsaturated fatty acids come into play. Because a lot of times for a high saturated fat diet, they do lard, and lard is in the United States is basically just pigs that eat soy, so it's just soybean oil.
That's true. Well, and even on the regular fat diet, like the regular chow diet for rats, there's still a pretty decent amount of PUFA in there that would be enough to affect. That would be enough on its own, even without like additional PUFA to cause the fatty liver and everything. So you have this first point where giving fructose to rats doesn't mean that, and causing inflammation doesn't mean it's going to cause inflammation in people. And then you do have some studies, I believe, in people where they give like huge doses of fructose on its own, and that causes issues. But that has not to do, it's not related to fructose metabolism in the liver. It has to do with fructose malabsorption, where basically in order to digest fructose, we need some glucose with it, or it digests much better with glucose with it.
Ideally at 1-to-1, from what I understand.
At least, yeah. So if you're giving a ton of fructose without that, then it doesn't get absorbed well in the intestines and then goes on to feed gut bacteria, which can produce toxins and cause all sorts of issues that would then cause liver issues too. So it's really, again, not dependent on it. It's not about fructose on its own. No. It's just the context.
It's not the sugar inherently. It's literally, it's never the sugar inherently as much as it is the bacterial end products in a lot of the studies.
Yeah. Yeah. So essentially it is the studies showing that fructose causes inflammation are more dependent on the context of the studies and much less on fructose itself. And so if we were to actually talk about sugar, like what does happen with sugar and inflammation, I would suggest that sugar is one of the most, sugar itself, again, not saying what, whether we're talking from fruit or white sugar, that we can talk about that in a second, but sugar itself is one of the most anti-inflammatory compounds that we could have. And this is because it's one of our best metabolic fuels, and fructose is even better than glucose in this way, or it can be better depending on the scenario. But so sugar as one of our best fuels then leads to efficient energy production, which I guess we should have started with what inflammation is, which is essentially damage, or essentially really a lack of energy. And so increasing the production of energy by increasing sugar is one of the best ways to reduce inflammation, and it directly reduces the stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And so, the whole idea that sugar itself causes these issues is really just not accurate. And a lot of times it's more related to the foods that people think of when you talk about sugar containing foods. A lot of times people talk about donuts being bad, or a cake or candy or whatever. And the issue isn't the sugar in those foods. There's a lot of polyunsaturated fats in there and other things that are really more of the issue. And we can talk specifically, I know, Mike, you want to talk probably about granulated sugar itself and its potential to cause inflammation.
You want me to do that right now?
Sure. Without talking about like every food specifically, I would just leave it at sugar itself doesn't cause inflammation. It depends on the context, and especially from something like fruit juice or fruits.
Well, I would say that
go there.
Yeah, I would say before you even get there, like just from a basic evolutionary perspective, like we were evolved for monkeys.
Yeah,
and the main diet of monkeys was not sweet potatoes or wheat or rice or bread or anything like that. It was fruit. The basis of higher order primates, bonobos, chimpanzees, is fruit. I think most of their diet is like figs or something like that. So it's figs and leaves. So just from an evolutionary perspective, it doesn't make that much sense to sit around and then talk about sugar and fructose as being poisons. But even further from that, I think the biggest issue that people have with sugar is specifically the granulated sugar. And that's just because of the bacterial utilization of the sugar in the small intestine. It's the way I see it, it's almost like sugar is such a ubiquitous fuel, like such a requirement for all organisms, that you literally have a competition in your gut between bacteria and your body trying to get the sugar as much as possible. And I think the biggest issue with the granulated sugar that people find is just that the bacteria are able to ferment it. So the what elucidated this the most for me is probably looking at the fatty liver studies, and looking at them in humans and monkeys. So like when you show monkeys, you give monkeys a bunch of sucrose, or a lot of studies, they give them pure fructose, which again, that doesn't make any sense, because monkeys and us can't absorb free fructose without the presence of glucose. I think.
And there's no foods that exist as just fructose.
Yeah, there's no foods in nature that are really just pure fructose. I think the only thing is like agave nectar.
Yeah, but how are you? I mean,
yeah, no, I know, but like,
it's not like we can extract that naturally, like easily.
Yeah. So the biggest issue is when you feed these animals. If you're talking pure fructose studies, they don't absorb it. And if you give regular people just pure fructose, I think some of the studies I showed was like 50% of the population can only absorb around 25 grams of pure fructose by itself. So when they do the studies, they give like 75 grams of pure fructose, and then they say, oh, well, here's 75 grams of pure fructose, and, all of a sudden we see inflammatory markers. But like the inflammatory markers, when they test for endotoxin, which is the bacterial poison, basically, the fermentation products, they find that that's very elevated in the portal vein of the liver. Like they see that that's very high, and it's like, well, yeah, because you just basically gave them a fuel they can't absorb, and now it's just fermented, particularly by species that could be pathogenic. So that's the first issue. And then the second issue is with sucrose. You have sort of the same issue going on, where you feed. And the other thing is they show it in the humans. It's always usually with high fat. With the humans, you have to have like a high fat diet and a high sugar diet to really get the fatty liver and to have it to progress to like any type of actual disease. Just if you're just to run on the sugar by itself, I think it's pretty hard to induce, from what I understand. I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that it's really difficult to induce it just on a pure carb diet with humans.
Yeah, I mean, the conversion of carbohydrate to fat in the liver is very minimal. We're much more likely to store it in adipose tissue or convert it to fat in our fat stores than.
But I also think that this supports the point of it being a bacterial problem, just because the way bacterial products get to the liver is via transport of fat.
Yeah, but you have to. I mean, as you mentioned, even on a no-fat diet, doesn't mean you're not absorbing any endotoxin. Like endotoxin can still get into the circulation. So. And we can talk about this a little more in depth. I also want to zoom out for people who aren't aware. What we're talking about with the white sugar is that basically when we digest food, first after our stomach goes to the small intestine, where we would typically absorb most of our food. And white sugar, for example, which is sucrose, would need to be broken down by an enzyme called sucrase into glucose and fructose, which could then be absorbed. And if it's depending, like if the sugar continues on without getting absorbed, then it goes to the large intestine, where it would be feeding gut bacteria, which can then produce toxins like endotoxin, which
could even do it in the small intestine.
It can if there's microbes in the small intestine, which it should be relatively clear in a healthy person. And that was kind of what I was going to get to, is that in someone who has impaired digestion, or in someone who has an impaired metabolism, which is then going to lead to impaired digestion and increased bacterial overgrowths and things, you're going to be your ability to digest many things, and this would include white table sugar, can be reduced. And this can mean that instead of you absorbing them, the bacteria consume them and then produce toxins.
There's also a time period where your intestine has to upregulate to digesting sugar after you don't eat it for a period of time. I think that some people, when they first introduce it, they may find issues too, because it doesn't happen right away. It does take some time for the enzymes to upregulate in the small intestine. Just
like if you haven't drinking milk for a long time and you try to drink milk again, it takes a little while for the lactase to be produced again. And just like if you have a low metabolism, all of these enzymes are going to be reduced, or if you have SIBO, which essentially they go hand in hand. And so, with the low metabolism, you also have reduced secretion of bile and other pancreatic enzymes and whatnot. So you have much less, basically we become much less efficient at absorbing and digesting our food, and our bacteria become more efficient, kind of to move back to the evolutionary perspective, kind of moving kind of backwards towards apes. which ferment a lot more food and digest less in the small intestine. That's one of the things that, where we differ.
We have the complete change in intestinal tract, where we're more absorptive with a larger small intestine, and the apes have a larger colon. So,
and not to get too far on a tangent, but this is another area that Ray differs, is his view of evolution, and which I think we'll have to do a separate podcast on it, because it's really awesome. But just this basic idea that we're constantly adapting and evolving, and there is a direction to it, and that direction is dependent on energy and complexity. And so if we were to compare us to apes, which we have greater intelligence and therefore essentially greater complexity, then what has allowed us to move that way is the increased energy in our internal environment, which has come about due to changes in gut function and some other
increased absorptive capacity, as opposed to reliance on fermentation. So basically just the change in diet, which is the most important part.
And the idea that, again, our diet changes are like the diet drives evolution and those kinds of things, which, again, I don't want to get too tangential on all that.
Yeah. So just to finish up, like, the question overall, just basically, when you gave rats high-fat diets and sugar, the sugar caused bacterial fermentation, or even monkeys and humans caused bacterial fermentation, and then the fat carries the bacterial end products to the liver. It's not necessarily bad if the fat carries it to the liver, because the liver detoxes it, assuming it's saturated fats, and medium chain triglycerides have a completely different effect that strengthens the gut lining, things like that, and protects against endotoxin. Besides the point right now. But if you give the rats, the humans, the monkeys, basically fruit juice, as opposed to the granulated sugar, you basically don't see the endotoxin effect at all. And my hypothesis on this is basically the polyphenols and flavonoids and everything that everybody calls like, oh, they're antioxidants, they're anti-inflammatory, this and that. Yeah. I think the biggest thing is
by hormesis, they're hormetic.
Yeah, they're hormetic. The biggest thing is they're so hormetic that we only absorb like 5% of them. The body basically attempts to not absorb them, just because of, I would assume, just because of their effects are not necessarily super beneficial overall internally, but they are antibiotic or bacteriostatic, somewhat bactericidal. So basically with the juice, you basically are getting the sugar without the bacterial end products, because the components of the fruit and vegetables and whatnot basically protect the sugar from being fermented by the bacteria. And then the other thing that I think is important with the juice, which is a little bit tangential, is that with the juice, as opposed to the table sugar, you're getting nutrients that go with the sugar to process it. So almost all fruit comes with a decent amount of potassium, some magnesium, the minerals, and B vitamins, which are essential to insulin function and to the cellular utilization of the sugar. So I would say overall for people, because she's asking from the perspective of the doctors tell her not to eat it, I would say your safest bet would be to try and stick towards fruits and fruit juices as your bulk of your like carb sources, as opposed to
or honey,
as opposed to the granulated sugar. Just because, number one, from an evolutionary perspective, that's what we come from, is the fruits. And I mean, just based on our digestive tract, the juice is actually even an increase because you don't have all the fiber and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then just from looking at these studies, basically, if you have some type of gut issue going on, the best way to sort of deal with the sugar issue is to stick with the fruit juices over the granulated sugar. And then the other thing too, I don't know what studies the doctors cite that show the sugar increases inflammation, because the only ones that I can really find are in relation to like fatty liver disease. I don't see studies where people give sugar and directly show inflammation throughout the body.
Well, when was the last time a doctor cited a study when they made a claim to you? I mean, not trying to like knock on doctors. I really don't mean it like that all doctors are bad, but normally when you go to a doctor, they make a lot of claims, and typically we don't question them, or even if we do, it's not like they're like talking to the research with you. It's just not how it goes. Yeah. And so I wanted to say a couple of things. One, I wanted to mention that I do want to be careful with that. You made some comment about how evolutionarily we naturally we would have had fruits. And I do think that that can be a problematic argument. So I don't want to.
Yeah. Well, okay. Don't rely on it then.
Yeah. No.
That's my hypothesis.
Well, no, I agree.
That's my assumption. If we're coming from that area, then.
Well, I don't disagree with you that we're coming from that area. I just think that the idea that just because something existed in our evolutionary history doesn't mean that it's necessarily ideal or that there aren't better options. So as you mentioned, which you mentioned it also, like fruit juice is probably better, even though we didn't really have fruit juice in the way that we do now back then. So, and the reason again is because this is energy dependent. It's not dependent on being adapted for a particular environment, which is part of that whole evolution perspective. And maybe we could talk about that. But
and sometimes pasteurized juice may be better than non-pasteurized juice, which is also not an evolutionary.
Right. Right. And so I wanted to talk about a couple of things you mentioned. One was the polyphenols. Just for people who don't know, polyphenols are the compounds in fruits and vegetables that give them their color and that people consider as like the really beneficial things. And they typically consider them to be beneficial based on their internal effects. But what Mike is talking about is that it seems like their benefits can come from not us absorbing them, but them staying in our intestines when we eat them. Not like staying, but they're with the food that we eat, and it prevents the bacteria or other microbes in our guts from eating our food.
And actually also preferentially, they sort of inhibit pathogens to some extent and allow somewhat positive bacteria to exist. So it helps prevent like a dysbiosis. It'd be bacteria that we're more like hospitable to, that don't cause as much issue.
Right. Yeah. And you had also mentioned that juice being protective against endotoxin in fruit. And there's that study that a lot of people, what's that?
Directly.
Yeah. So, well, and there's that study.
Orange juice study, but there's also one on grape juice and pineapple juice that show the same thing as the orange juice study.
Okay. Yeah. And so those studies are all, they basically just show that the endotoxin load is reduced when those things are consumed. There's something else I was thinking of, and now I lost my train of thought because there's so many other things I wanted to backtrack and mention. Was there anything else you wanted to add as far as the sugar and inflammation topic?
Just that there's studies basically showing that like just the taste of sweetness from sugar, or just like drinking sugar, having any sugary thing at all, directly lowers cortisol from the hypothalamus. So it's literally the like number one anti-stress signal. It's like taking in sugar literally turns off the hypothalamus and like cortisol responses.
Yeah. And that's something that's talked about a lot in regards to athletes, where they talk about for when you're in a race or something, and they don't want to actually like something relatively short distance, where they don't want to actually be drinking a lot of fluids or drinking a lot of sugar. So they'll do a rinse with something with sugar in order to get that benefit from the response that you're talking about, where we sense the sugar in our mouths, and then that actually has a pretty significant effect.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all I have. I mean, I'm sure we can go on tangents with it, but I think leave it there.
Yeah, there's no need to. All right, so on to the next question. We have Terry. So Terry basically explained that she exercises a lot. She does CrossFit type training 5 to 6 days per week. And then on her off days, she's doing 5 to 6 mile walks or bikes. She also does Pilates. Yeah, it's a lot of exercise. And
what age group is this woman?
She's in her she's around 50. And she actually mentioned 50 is the new 30. So yeah, I mean this is really what's
that's more exercise than I was doing when I was 15.
Yeah, I mean, outside of when I was doing sports like wrestling or football, I was doing a lot. They really put it on.
Yeah, but not 7 days a week. That's a lot.
At least 5 or 6. We would have practice every day for a few hours, and then we would have meets on the weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was rough. I mean, there's no surprise that everyone's immunocompromised. Everyone gets sick. Everyone feels terrible during that season. Yeah, it's a really tough thing to do. All right, so getting back to the question, she essentially exercises a lot and said that she would love simple food options that would help with workout recovery and to still keep the weight off. And then what she also kind of asked about timing and if it's important to eat certain things after a workout or like at snacks or versus lunch or dinner.
Yeah.
But I think first, before we talk directly about those questions, just the amount of exercise is really a lot. And again, like that can work for some people, but I think that there is this fallacy that more is better.
Yeah.
And as we're kind of talking about with from this whole energetic perspective, some amount of exercise is important for producing energy and using energy. It improves mitochondrial function and all sorts of things. It actually has beneficial effects.
Changes hormonal. It increases muscle mass, changes hormonal profiles.
Yeah, and there's I think a lot of
minimum effective dose and also a maximum effective dose that I think a lot of people just don't get.
Yeah, well, and I want to mention also, I think there's a lot of information that we've yet to find about the effects on our myofascial system and how our fascia is tied with a lot of, just like kind of a lot of our general functions, especially as far as energy and structure being interdependent. Our fascia is this entire kind of web system that runs throughout our bodies. And by not moving, we really kind of inhibit its function.
Yeah. Or adopting sort of maladaptive postures, like sitting down, or what's another one that I think sitting is probably one of the worst, and then probably wearing shoes and socks, especially shoes that constrict your feet. I think those are some of the worst. And then just we could mouth posture and breathing postures and things like that. Those are.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far into all of that, but suffice it to say that movement is important, and there's a lot more to dig into as far as that goes. But all that being said, as you're mentioning, there's a minimum effective dose. There's basically a point where more exercise, because exercise, let's consider what exercise is. Aside from being movement, it also is stressful in that it requires the usage of energy. And so while some of these effects are beneficial, the usage of energy can be problematic when this is the energy that we need for our brains to function and all of our digestive organs to function and everything else. So by depleting ourselves of too much energy, we're depleting the rest of our bodies of energy. So we have to consider first that if you are exercising a lot, you need to be eating a lot. But also you may want to reconsider exactly how much we're exercising. And the idea that more is always better is it's not accurate because of these stressful effects. And then we might also have to talk about kind of the whole calories in, calories out idea, because she had mentioned keeping weight off, and that's kind of where the whole exercise more comes from, is the idea that we need to burn more calories to lose weight. And if we're gaining fat, then it's because we have too many calories.
I think a lot of people too, there's this argument that our ancestors were exercising a lot more than we are. And there's a lot of studies that came out recently, or at least anthropological sort of research reports, calculating total daily expenditure of different populations, and just basically finding that the expenditure of the population, some of these populations, isn't what we expected and is about the same as what we are, if not less in some of them. Right. And they will develop the same issues. So I think we can sort of throw out to some extent the hypothesis that the reason people are getting diseases and this and that is because they're eating too much and they're not exercising enough. They're not moving enough. I think that's sort of very, very basic and not really capturing what the real issues are. And so I think that's where you get this idea, I need to exercise all the time, this. And then the other thing that I think is important to mention, because you briefly touched upon it, our other body functions use energy just as much, but there's Ray Peat actually mentioned it, but having a walk through a new place or interesting conversations or things like that, your brain requires a significant amount of energy, more so than what I think we calculate. And at one point, I think I found some studies that some Eastern Bloc Russian type stuff. I think Ray mentioned it, where they were talking about the energy expenditure of the brain in new environments or something like that.
Well, even at rest, it uses 20% of our total energy expenditure, which is a huge portion. And I'm sure it's more in those new environments. Although I've seen research that it doesn't change all that much, but I don't know about.
I've seen some of those too, and those were more Western studies.
Yes, they are.
So that basically they basically calculated how much calories per hour different organ systems burned. I've seen those. I looked at those too. I was like, But
yeah,
I know that
either way. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I noticed both you and I have noticed that even talking like this about all these different topics and going reading something, there's definitely an element where you feel the fatigue. You feel like you get hungry, like you crave sugar, things like that. Like I know we both have noticed that. So
yeah, and so without diving too much into all this background, for example, we've talked about the issue of exercising more and eating less from just that simple energetic perspective, and I have a couple articles about that. So for people who want to find out more, I have an article about eating less, exercising more specifically, and then also one about the calorie equation, like calories in, calories out, and all the flaws with that. So I'll link to those so we can kind of move past that. But so when talking about that a little more specifically, as far as kind of keeping the weight off, I mean, a lot of that has more to do with what you're eating as opposed to how much or how much you're exercising. And so without kind of giving an entire diet prescription, and as we've talked about, carbohydrates are really important, especially sugars from fruits and fruit juice, and those are definitely good to have before and after workouts. And it's important to have protein too, but the idea that there's like a window, that 30-minute window after exercising that you need to get your protein in, that's kind of, there's a lot of evidence against that, where it doesn't have to be quite so precise. Yeah. It is important to be eating enough protein, for sure, especially because many women aren't, and many people in general aren't. So eating enough protein is definitely important, especially when you're working out that much. I would definitely be shooting in like the 80 to 100 grams range. And again, test it out and kind of see how it feels. And then as far as carbohydrates go, I mean, to be exercising that much, you have to be really eating a lot.
Yeah, I would, for the protein part, I'm going to address it in points, but for the protein part, for the first point, this research that I've read on, and this is from bodybuilding literature and exercise physiology, things like that. The research that I read, there's basically a lot of the bodybuilders like shoot for these ridiculously high like protein requirements. But from the studies that I've read, in order to get enough protein to maintain a positive nitrogen balance and to also like not lose lean mass, yet at the same time not oxidize the protein, because your liver will oxidize it if you have too much. You'll just use it for energy.
Right. It'll convert it, for those who don't know, it'll convert the protein to sugar essentially to use it as energy. Exactly.
So in order to get enough to prevent lean tissue loss, but also, so it's like this window, but also not have too much that you're going to oxidize. There was like a compilation of reports by a guy named Menno Henselman. He's in the fitness industry basically. And he has a thing online. You can just Google Menno Henselman protein. And I think they came out to something like...
We'll link to it in the description because I don't know how to spell that. I don't even know what you're saying.
Menno Henselman is like, he's a foreign dude. Okay, and he's a researcher. And like he went through a bunch of meta-analysis and studies and everything to like come to the number that he thought was... There was an argument between him and another researcher that's prominent in the field.
Okay.
Whatever.
I'll link to it in the description. So,
but basically, I think they came out to like, I think it was 0.6 or 0.7 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. Mm-hmm. So people say 1 gram per pound, but it was more like the window was 0.6 to 0.8, depending on exercise and how much carbs you're eating and things like that. So.
And for people not in the bodybuilding community, I mean, most people I would assume are more on the undereating side as far as protein goes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But that was sort of the window. It was like 0.65, and then they increased a few deviations on the numbers to basically say, well, this would be like the safe range.
Okay.
So I would say 0.7 to 0.8 grams per pound is like a good number to shoot for if you want to be anal about it. And then, for the carbs.
So that's about 120 grams for a 150-pound person.
Yeah.
Which sounds like it might be a little bit on the high end. Again, which I don't know if you're going to touch on it, but for a lot of people, which I know you kind of explained that protein will get converted to carbohydrates, a lot of people find that their protein requirements decrease if they're eating enough carbohydrates, if they were eating a lot of protein before.
Especially sugar. Yeah. Especially sugars. I've noticed that for myself. And like when I take in more sugar, I don't require quite as much protein.
Yeah.
Then for the carbs, something that's really important for a lot of people to keep in mind. Yes, you're going to use carbs. You got to refill glycogen in the liver, the muscles, whatever else. But basically, there's a ratio in the body, specifically a lot of bodybuilders care about it, a lot of men specifically, but it's your testosterone to cortisol ratio. And that's dependent upon your ratio of carbs to protein. Basically, the higher protein you have in the face of less carbs, the higher cortisol you're going to have over testosterone. And I think that it's just that, and then also sugar being a direct activator of thyroid hormone. It's sort of important to maintain a high amount of carbs in the diet. Some of the things that I've seen, just looking at the Jaminets, Paul Jaminet, and from the Perfect Health Diet and whatnot, I think he calculated basically what a minimum effective like sugar requirement was, and it was like at 150 grams a day. And he has it as glucose, but I would say for a lot of people, and that was just for nervous system functioning, replenishing the mucus layer in your gut and things like that. I think for most people, they would want to probably get more than that for sure. Especially for exercising. Like I would probably, I would probably add like another 50 to 100 grams.
Oh, I would say more than that. But I mean, again, it depends on body size and all that. You'll have to test it out. But
I would say just at a minimum. I was going to say just like that for a minimum, just to function like comfortably. And I think if people stuck with the fruit juice and sugars, specifically fruits and fruit juices over starches, they would find that they wouldn't gain quite as much weight. And just as a personal, they probably wouldn't gain weight at all. But I know we're both young. We're both in our 20s. But just as like a personal example, I probably consume around 300 to 400 grams of sugar a day from fruit juice on top in like the context of a 3,500 calorie diet. And I actually lost weight when I started doing it, and got to like a very lean level, just like with that amount of sugar and whatnot. And I feel pretty good overall. So I don't think that a lot of people are going to gain weight necessarily with that. Maybe if you're doing like a lot of granulated sugar and you have some type of gut issue, you may get that.
Well, and for the average person, that's not really an issue. I think that more of the issue for most people is a lot of grains. So as far as weight gain goes, a lot of it comes more down to
inflammation in the gut.
Yeah, inflammation in the gut, and then assuming that other things are in place, assuming that you're getting enough nutrients and things. So assuming that that's in place, as far as inflammation in the gut goes, I mean, if you're eating grains like a lot of wheat, pasta, bread, that can be
brown
an issue.
Rice,
especially if you're doing like those complex carbs like brown rice and quinoa. And it said, favoring carb sources like fruits is much better. And as far as starches goes, white rice or potatoes are much better options.
Sweet potatoes and white potatoes are probably the like most ideal starch source. And I would consider starch a gray area. Personally, for me, it doesn't sit very well. But some people do okay with it. But I would say I would stick with white potatoes and sweet potatoes just because they actually have some sort of nutrient content.
You're not worried about the beta carotene in those sweet potatoes?
Well, they have purple sweet potatoes.
That's true. They do, and they taste way better. But yeah, also I was kind of joking. I think that small of an amount of beta carotene isn't the issue for 99% of people, or isn't an issue.
So the last issue would be specifically for fat. For fat requirements, if you have a higher muscle mass, I've noticed for myself, number one, if you have a higher muscle mass, you may require a little bit more fat. I also think that fat significantly helps with digestion. I know a lot of people on the forum, the Ray Peat forum, are like on the low fat diet, and there's like a lot of that over there. But I think that fat is like very necessary. And I sort of see it from the hormonal perspective where your sugar is for your thyroid and things like that, but your fat is,
and as a fuel.
Yeah. And as a fuel, but your fat is sort of like to improve your digestion and to increase your steroid hormones for women, estrogen, testosterone, DHT, things like that. And then it helps to, I think, sort of stabilize you throughout, like between meals. Because I notice if I go on very low fat diet, I'm drinking juice and eating sugar like almost every hour. It becomes too much. So
so we do use some amount of fat as a fuel too.
Well, you're always going to oxidize fats. It's just a matter of how much fat are you going to oxidize. And then this is a little bit tangential, but at least for me, I think that having enough fat in the diet, besides the digestion and providing for the steroid hormones, I think that it also spares glucose for tissues like the nervous system. I don't have research on that. It's just sort of like my personal experience. And that's like the gist of it.
And it makes sense that at the very least, we need to be supplying sugar for our nervous system.
Yeah. That's thyroid and hormonal functions. And then the fats can sort of take over for some of the digestive organs and the musculature.
I still think that, yeah. I mean, and I still think that it would probably be ideal for it to be more sugar, but.
Yeah. Well, this is in the context of you have a high sugar, like adequate protein diet. And for me, I have high sugar, high fat. So, and then the other thing to keep in mind is research, and everybody says high sugar, high fat is causing people to get fat. That's basically what they say. Oh, American diet is a lot of sucrose and a lot of saturated fat. And I can say from personal experience, I have eaten between the 300 and 400 grams of sugar from fruit, and then the 140 grams of saturated fat, mostly every day for probably close to, I don't know, 8 months, 9 months. And I haven't gained weight. I haven't gone fat. I haven't had any sort of health issues from it. My liver is okay. So yeah.
And just for context, while you are young, you're also someone who has gained a lot of weight when you've been on a diet that causes issues. Like you've gained 50 pounds. And while some of that was muscle, a lot of it wasn't. And you were definitely pretty high body fat percentage. So
yeah,
it's not like you're impervious to weight gain.
Yeah. I was higher than I had ever been in my life in body fat percentage and weight 2 times, one with milk and then the other one with the high starch diets.
Yeah. I have to talk about milk. No, I'm just kidding. We'll talk about that another time.
And then the other point,
I'm also, just for clarification, we're not anti-milk. And I drink milk myself. So
no, just I think for people who can use it, it's a great resource for sure. I know we differ a little bit on our opinions on it, but I think it's like very minuscule in the scheme of things. But the last point I wanted to make was she asked about timing. And something that I think that's really important for people is, number one, especially if you're exercising, I would say to eat before you go and exercise and not do fasted exercise is a great idea.
To prevent stress.
I don't think that fasting before exercise is good at all. I'll let you talk about the different stress with that, but I would say that specifically, I would try and leave time though after you eat, at least like an hour and a half, something like that, an hour and a half, just so that you can at least digest your food a little bit. Because I think I've noticed for me, it causes issues to go and exercise directly after you eat. It's an old wives' tale, whatever you want to call it, like an old saying, wait 45 minutes before you swim. I think that there's some validity to that. Another thing that I think, and this is a little bit separate, if you're having some gut issues, I think leaving a decent amount of time between meals, between 2 hours, 3 hours between meals can help you out. But still making sure that you eat, and it's just basically through the migrating motor complex in the intestine. You can Wikipedia that. But basically, it's just it's just the contractions of the intestine to clear it out. So people who are having like a lot of intestinal issues, maybe like some overgrowth or things like that, the contractions in the intestine from the migrating motor complex basically like clear out the bacteria and the food and the debris. So I think that could be helpful for people to leave some time with that, and then making sure that you're getting enough calories, enough meals. And I don't think like waiting 16 hours or 14 hours or things like that is a good idea to do on a regular basis overnight. We've talked about it before, but just like the hormonal profiles of people who doing intermittent fasting, as far as like specifically in young men, looking at their androgens and their thyroid levels and then their cortisol levels, it didn't look good. Like it was a drop in androgens and thyroid and an increase in cortisol.
Oh, you had to bring up intermittent fasting, didn't you? I agree with you. And there's actually
people like that. And I think that about timing with eating, it's pretty important, because a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to do a fasted workout. And then, I don't think that that's helpful at all.
No, I agree. There's surprisingly a lot of people who follow the Ray Peat perspective and are supportive of fasting, think it's a really good idea. And I would consider that there are benefits of it, basically, in clearing the intestines.
For sure.
But there's much better ways to go about that are less stressful than starving yourself for a period of time. because that is inherently stressful. It is. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're not eating for a period of time and starve. That's
well, the bacteria are going to outlast you. I think that a lot of people starve for the bacteria, and it's just like you can starve yourself and you can get rid of the bacterial end products. But I think when you come back, if you're not eating things the right way, you're just going to run back into the same problem again.
That's true too. And they can be complex problems to solve, but I don't want to delve too much into that. But so just a couple last things I want to mention, and then I want to wrap up this question and the podcast. So for Terry, I think that it's important to just consider exercise and all of this in the context of energy. So exercise has benefits of like movement, as we talked about, which are inherently beneficial. But it also causes stress because it uses up energy that your body needs to use for everything else it does. And so excessive amounts of energy or of exercise, especially without a lot of food, is going to cause essentially an energy deficiency, which is that's kind of really what the root of all issues comes down to, or that's what I would say. All sorts of chronic conditions, and including like obesity and all those things, which we think that obesity and fat gain is a product of too much energy, but it's actually a lack of energy, which is a whole other topic. But all these issues, the largest issues all come down to this energy deficiency. And so that's really what we want to be avoiding. And we actually want to or provide an energy surplus. And so potentially reducing the exercise a little bit could be helpful. You'll have to kind of see how that goes. And then changing which foods you eat, and then making sure you're eating enough are all important. And I wanted to touch on fats as well, because that's not something we talked about just as in general for kind of, an average layperson who's trying to eat healthy. A lot of times they're probably eating a lot of polyunsaturated fats. And without explaining too much of this, the polyunsaturated fats are not good from an energetic perspective. And I do have a couple articles about that, so I'll link to those as opposed to lengthening this podcast another hour. And polyunsaturated fats are omega-3s and omega-6s. So they're found in fatty fish like salmon, and they're found in nuts and seeds. They're also, in fish oil, and they're also in vegetable oils like canola oils and things, except for olive oil, which has a small amount, but not too much, and coconut oil. So as far as using fats for cooking, coconut oil, butter are best, and then maybe a little bit of olive oil here and there. And then potentially switching out some of the fatty fish and nuts and things for leaner fish like sole or cod, or other seafood like shrimp or mussels.
And for nuts, you could switch to macadamias. Those are the safest of all the nuts.
Yeah, they've the least amount of polyunsaturated fats. They're still, I don't think, an ideal food, but
I don't think nuts at all are an ideal food. But some people aren't going to be as purist.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So no, it's a good recommendation to bring up. And then
chocolate is definitely,
chocolate's a good one, and then potentially eating more dairy, which has more saturated fat, as another food, and then dairy cheese.
We did talk about weight gain though, and dairy can induce weight gain in people.
It can.
It makes me gain weight.
Well, sometimes when you drink a gallon of milk, it's different from drinking a cup.
Hey, that pint of ice cream shouldn't have done anything to me. Those multiple pints of ice cream.
So maybe a little bit of dairy, just kind of test it out and see. And then again, fruits and fruit juice being definitely some of the best foods. And then maybe some cooked vegetables too, and meats in there, and seafood. So I know that was kind of vague and maybe not the most helpful, but I'll link to some of those articles, and I hope that it was at least helpful from a more general context. Again, it's something that we talked about is this whole idea of not making kind of specific prescriptions, and the whole idea of not saying here's what you should be eating, and instead explaining the principles behind it. And then,
well, I think she wanted some ideas for like snack ideas. So I guess just for something like that, I think we could give, like, if you wanted to do something like, I would try and put, like, depending if you're around your workouts or whatnot, I would try and have some carbs and some protein. I think that would be helpful. So, you could have like some fruit juice with, your meal could be like some cod, with, you can have some cooked broccoli. You can put some coconut, you can cook the cod in coconut oil and put butter on the broccoli, and you can have some fruit juice and have that before. And then after your meal, if you're lifting weights or something, I guess the white rice could work with, whether it's coconut oil, beef tallow, butter. and then you can have lean chicken breast or something like that, and then a little bit of sugar with it. You can have some more juice, and then if you want to have
fruits
snacks,
like
whatever, melons, whatever works for you, whatever fruit works for you, doesn't irritate your gut or cause any digestive symptoms or anything like that. And then just for snacks, like if you want to carry with you, you can carry chocolate.
There's potato chips cooked in coconut oil. Those are really good.
Yeah, any type of fruit. If you're gonna do nuts, you could do the macadamia nuts. We don't necessarily eat nuts, but like again, macadamia nuts are probably some of the safest if you're gonna eat them overall. And then I don't know. I try and stick to solid meals, but you can take juice anywhere with you. Orange juice, lemonade,
cheese and fruit is a good one, like grapes.
Yeah, cheese and fruit. Some people like cottage cheese. Cottage cheese with their fruit with like oranges in it or whatever.
Smoothies are always a good option too.
Yeah, smoothies with some. I mean, I know you prefer goat milk. I don't know if you want to go into all that, but
no, I don't want to go into it right now. It's too much.
Yeah, like a smoothie like strawberry banana with goat milk or something like that. I don't know.
You can do regular milk. You could throw some maybe collagen protein powder in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, and again, what I was saying earlier, as far as not wanting to give not wanting to give concrete ideas as far as this is what you should eat, it was, it's kind of more in reference to like there's nothing wrong with snack ideas. I think that's like all good.
No, I wasn't saying that what you're saying is wrong. I'm just saying like her question was about particularly snacks. So I was like, we might as well just throw out some easy snack ideas so that she can,
Definitely. I just think it's also important for people to recognize that when asking questions, I think one kind of, and this isn't in reference to Terry, this is just kind of in general, kind of what we were talking about earlier, where, because she didn't do this, but a lot of times the question will be some form of, here's my situation, what do I do? And I think that there's a lot of issues with, I mean, it's not like a great perspective from which to approach health. It's not taking your health into your own hands. It's not trying to educate yourself or figure out why you're dealing with whatever you're dealing with. Yeah. It's kind of, you're looking to outsource it or looking to blindly follow someone else essentially. So,
well, I think with those situations, I know you want to wrap this up, but I think giving people like general food groups with some of the ideas and principles behind them is helpful. Mm-hmm. And then sort of it always comes down to, you got to try and see how it makes you feel. You can say that milk has all this list of logical benefits and we can go through all of them. But if you don't feel good when you drink milk, like just don't drink it. It really it's that simple, and you try it for a week, you get bad effects, take it out, change your context a little, play with different other foods, see how they work. You start to feel better, try milk again, take it out. If it doesn't work, if it does work, it's sort of just a process of, keeping what works and throwing out what doesn't, and then sort of like retrying different things that you think may be beneficial down the road. So we can give you basic ideas as to food groups. I mean, we sort of gave you some fruit juice.
And I have a few others here that I'll share.
Yeah. The dairy, like the ruminant meats, beef, lamb, goat, and then some seafood, shrimp, scallops, things like that. Like those are all very helpful foods, but you got to see what works for you. It's really what it comes down to, no matter what the logical basis, no matter what I say, no matter what Ray Peat says, you really got to do what works for you.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's more about the perspective from which we're looking at things, like the perspective from which we're asking these questions, as opposed to what the questions actually are. Yeah. So smoothies are a good idea. Sorry, just throwing out some more snack ideas. Fruit bars or potentially dried fruit. You could do like a cereal with milk, maybe like a rice or corn cereal. Plantain chips or potato chips cooked in coconut oil or potentially palm oil, if depending.
The banana chips from Whole Foods cooked in coconut oil are a pretty good option.
Could do those. Hard-boiled eggs or soft-boiled eggs. Could do baked fruit like apples or pears or peaches.
Bacon.
Could do bacon. Could do egg. I mean, bacon. Pastured bacon. Hopefully not.
Beef bacon. Whole Foods has a dope beef bacon.
They don't have it here where I am, unfortunately.
Yeah. You have the sun, so it's okay.
Eggs are always a good option. So yeah, so that was some good snack ideas, I think. I think I want to wrap up that question, but was there anything else you wanted to mention or talk about before we close out?
No, I'm pretty solid.
All right.
I'm saturated.
You're saturated. Good. All righty. Well, thank you to everyone who listened this far. I don't know. What are we? Almost 2 hours? An hour and a half? 2 hours? Yeah. So
Joe Rogan.
yeah. And so I do have a super long list of questions to get to. But for anyone else who has questions, feel free to send them in to j@jfeldmanwellness.com. And at jfeldmanwellness.com, you can read a bunch of articles and got a ton of free information up there. And yeah, I guess we'll see you next time. And if you guys have recommendations for different show topics or anything like that too, feel free to send those in. And again, it's J, all spelled out, J-A-Y, at j-a-y-feldmanwellness.com. All right. Well, thanks for joining me, Mike.
You're welcome.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel and anywhere else that this podcast is up. I'm sure I'll have it on iTunes and everything. So if you also want to leave a review, I would super appreciate that. And you can also check me out on Facebook or Instagram. Facebook, J Feldman Wellness, and Instagram, I think the handle is at JF Wellness, just the letters JF. But if you search J Feldman Wellness, it'll come up. So I guess that's it. But yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next time.